Hi, I'm Callie. I'm here with Steve McCormick, owner and game developer for ClockTower Game Studios. We're here to have a tea and talk and discuss S.E.E.R. Steve?
Yeah, tonight we're just going to go over some of the basics, kind of give a broad overview of what S.E.E.R is and why it's a game you should play.
Alright, Steve, so tell us a little bit about yourself and ClockTower Game Studios.
Well, ClockTower Game Studios is a small independent game company currently working on our first game, S.E.E.R.
What got you started in game design?
Well, I guess I started game designing when I was really young, probably like 8 or 9. My brothers in our bedroom playing with Legos when we were really small. It was a haphazard role-playing game using Lego characters. I tried to way overcomplicate it for what it was, especially for being 8.
Sounds like fun times.
I enjoyed it. Nobody else did. Hopefully S.E.E.R doesn't turn out that way.
Of all the games you've played, what are some of your favorites?
Well, it depends on the genre, but for mini games, since that's what we're here to talk about primarily, for normal games, like normal style skirmish games in particular, my favorite type, and I really like Bushido. For fleet warfare, though, which is like a space combat, fleet battles thing, I really like Firestorm Armada.
So, Steve, what exactly is S.E.E.R?
Well, S.E.E.R is a universal rules set for playing skirmish battles. It's exactly in the name, actually. S.E.E.R actually stands for Skirmish Encounter Elementary Rules. The idea was to have fairly straightforward, relatively intuitive rules for how to play a skirmish battle using any models across any genres and any manufacturers you wanted. So when my friend that got me into this mess and I were talking about it, Chris Barrick, he sold me on the idea of a universal skirmish game for just doing firefights at first. And as we talked about it, the idea come out, well, why stop there? There's all these companies that make so much cooler models than just dudes with guns. Why not include, fantasy models or really outlandish stuff like dwarves riding bears carrying shotguns? So I sold him on that idea, and then we kind of started working on it, and it sort of exploded from there.
So, what kind of miniatures should be used for S.E.E.R?
Well, since it's a universal game, you can use basically any models you want. It's built with specific scale in mind, 28 to 32 millimeter scale. But as far as like the miniatures themselves, you can use basically anything. Of course, we do have some kind of preferred model companies we've worked with that have helped us out with letting us use their models for pictures and videos like the ones we're making here, as well as other promotional stuff, and eventually our publication. So some of those companies are Anvil Industries. They make primarily sci-fi and sort of modern-ish models. They do really high detail, really high quality resin casts. They're beautiful models. You've seen a lot of their work with the Daughters of the Burning Rose that have featured heavily on the channel so far.
And God, they're pretty.
Aren't they, though?
Their resin was just a dream to work with.
Yeah, it's really nice. I really like them. Then there's Ramshackle Games. They do their own game, Nuclear Renaissance, and it's kind of a post-apocalyptic nuclear wasteland, mutants and all that good stuff. And those models are pretty cool. They actually offer really great prices on their stuff. You can get a lot of models for a really good price.
Resin and metal too, right?
Yeah, some of their models are metal, and they're pretty nice. I don't know that I have any of their metal models on hand off the top of my head. I think I have one.
I do on the shelf, but...
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think we've got a couple. But anyway, then there's Bombshells Miniatures. They do kind of a cool retro sci-fi theme, like a lot of like 50s pulp sci-fi stuff that's really cool. Bubble helmets and all, and kind of anthro sort of alien species that are really neat. They also have their own game called Counterblast, which is very cool.
I've got
And then there's Titan Forge. They, of course, have a Patreon where you can get their STL files to 3D print your own models from them. And then they also offer their models as hard copies in resin that you can get from their online store. And they're really cool, really high detail models. Those models have been so much fun to work with and print. Yeah. I think more than half of the stuff I've printed, which has been a lot, has been their models. The only thing that's kind of interesting about their models as far as the scales go is the 3D prints come off at around 32 millimeter scale, while the physical models are closer to 28. So if you're getting the stuff to 3D print and you want it for 28 millimeter, that's a good thing to keep in mind. But that's a video for another time. We'll talk more in detail about them. Then there's model companies we haven't used as much. Zealot Miniatures, Coruscant Miniatures. Coruscant, similar to Scotia Grindles, does a huge variety of different models. They've done primarily 15 millimeter, like smaller scale stuff for independent games, but they also do some 28 millimeter sci-fi stuff that's really cool. And then, of course, our newest company that's joined us has been Lion Tower Miniatures, who are 3D sculptors, and they
phenomenally so.
Yeah, their stuff is really cool, and I'm really happy we get to use it. They do a lot of fantasy, kind of normal fantasy stuff. One of their Patreon campaigns for one of the months was an Adventurers Guild. This month's was the City Watch, including a couple of revelers drunkenly wandering down the street. They also do called the Kingsguard, which are armored knights, and a couple of them are basically borrowed from an older video game franchise. If you're into the giant chicken rider look for your knights, that's definitely where you want to be.
It's definitely the place to check.
Of course, there's also Cyborg, Monstrous Miniatures. They're cool because they're traditionally crafted. Like, he actually models all of his miniatures in plasticine and then makes casts and molds of them, and then sells the resin miniatures from there. And those models are fantastic. And earlier we mentioned the bear cavalry with the dwarves riding them with the shotguns and stuff. That's where those models come from. And they are every bit as glorious as they sound.
I can only imagine with a visual like that.
I love them. I wish they are a little on the pricey side, but the quality and for the fact they're handcrafted, hand sculpted, they're worth it.
The hours put into making the blinks alone make it more than worth it.
Absolutely.
Well, with options that diverse, how do you balance it? Like, how would you take your fantasy swordsman against something like Grecian gladiators?
Well, there's two different ways that we've approached balancing the game from that aspect. The first of which is that everything's based on a points buy system. So, like, a super sci-fi soldier's assault rifle is going to cost way more points than a caveman's club and leather armor. So that's one way. Also, since it's a skirmish game, we found during testing early on that the number of bodies on the field really impacts the way the game plays. So even if you've got a couple foot soldiers that are equipped with lower end, lower tech weapons, they can make up the difference pretty easily against the sci-fi soldiers. So lower tech levels have more bodies built into their basic lists, whereas high-tech stuff, you get fewer models, but you get better gear and more resilient guys as a result.
That's totally fair. I guess that would make a lot of sense. Weaker weapons or more rudimentary weaponry would be a lot cheaper to use, and you could have more guys against the 5 sci-fi super soldiers out here ready to blow people away.
Exactly.
Tell us a little bit more about the mechanics of the game.
Well, mechanically, S.E.E.R is kind of, as a skirmish game, it's already wandering away from traditional wargaming like 40K or any of the other big games like War Machine and those sorts of games. And it's sort of wandering into the territory of role-playing games where you get a little bit more granular. Instead of whole squads of guys, you have individual models.
Units, so to speak.
Yeah, instead of your unit size for like 40k or a traditional war game being like a squad, a unit in S.E.E.R is an individual dude. So that changes the way the game plays quite a bit. It's a lot faster because you don't have as much stuff to move around. So a gameplay, instead of taking multiple hours for a full-size game of 40k or other game like that, instead you take between 30-45 minutes for people that know what they're doing. And mechanically, like I said, it's more towards the role-playing game physically. So you have, whereas in normal games you just automatically climb up and down sheer surfaces at a movement rate penalty or whatever, in S.E.E.R there's actually sort of a skill check kind of mechanic where you climb or jump across gaps, or if you want to jump down distances. There's also more granular actions, like you can close and lock doors or that sort of thing if they're available in the environment. Which, that's another thing that's important to mention about S.E.E.R is, unlike a lot of games where the terrain doesn't matter as much, in S.E.E.R it very much matters. You want to have very densely packed terrain. You want a very populated game board with lots of area terrain and line of sight blocking.
Nooks and crannies and
you definitely want to...
obstacles.
Yeah, you absolutely want to have areas where models can not necessarily hide, because you don't want them to be able to slow down or just bring gameplay to a halt, but you definitely want a ton of stuff for people to put their models behind and take cover. It's a much more tactical, granular game as opposed to the more strategic side of like a Warhammer or a War Machine.
That's definitely fair. So, why should people play S.E.E.R?
Well, it's a universal game, so whether you're a veteran who has a ton of models, has a bunch of gaming experience under your belt, or if you're a new player that's just getting into the game, it's an easy game to pick up. It's relatively cheap because you just need the rulebook and a handful of models. It's also a great game because you don't have to have the same stuff your friends have. Like, one of the things I love about S.E.E.R is like we mentioned earlier, one of my favorite mini games is Bushido, who I know exactly 3 people that play, and they live on the other side of the country from me. So you can take your models from a game like Bushido that's very niche, very narrow, and doesn't have a huge following here in the US, and turn around and sit down with your friends that have more popular games like Infinity or Warmahordes or Warhammer 40K, Age of Sigmar, any of that. You can just mix and match and play whatever you want. And the way the rules are set up, if you want to mix and match your force, there's a way you can even go about doing that. So if you want to play with your favorite model from a dozen different ranges, we've got you.
So would you call S.E.E.R a gateway game?
S.E.E.R is, in a lot of ways, a gateway game because it is low entry. And rules-wise, it's intuitive enough and similar enough to other games from you point the gun at the guy, you draw line of sight, you roll your check to hit, you do your armor save, and that sort of thing. From a mechanical standpoint, it is a great game as a gateway game. It's a good way to get into wargaming at the low end.
So, thinking about it, does S.E.E.R have a setting, or is it very versatile?
Yes to both, actually. So, S.E.E.R has a very generic setting in that the premise behind what ties all this together and lets you play your high elf fantasy wizards against somebody else's super soldiers and power armor is that once upon a time, before the dawn of time, there was a galaxy-spanning empire that had conquered most of the world and had allies of all sorts of aliens. Well, something terrible happened. It collided with another plane of existence, which introduced magic into the world, or into the galaxy, I should say. And after introducing magic, it kind of shattered reality. So the empire kind of crumbled, fell apart, isolated pockets of civilization remained. Humanity evolved or devolved depending on what the local planet and technology was like. If they were, an agri-world producing tons of food but not much else, well, then they probably didn't have a ton of technology to base their evolution off of. In other places, you'd have different tech arise based on what they had around. So this would be how you'd explain away things like different variations of sizes of humans. And you could play with your 25 millimeter models or your 32 millimeter models and work those in rules-wise. There's also, that's how you could justify things like very specialized, weird technology branches like steampunk, Magitech, dieselpunk, like cyberpunk. I'm excited for. Basically, because of that, that's where it leads to the versatility of it, is you could claim whatever you wanted as far as your models and your setting went. So if you wanted to justify having a model from a bunch of different lines, you could call it an exploratory force, where there was a scout ship or a couple of scouts that ventured across this forgotten planet where technology's devolved to fantasy level. So you could have your sci-fi scout trooper running around with your fantasy knight in full plate packing a two-handed sword.
Well, that just sounds all sorts of exciting.
Well, it definitely makes the... Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say the possibilities are quite literally endless.
It is, which is kind of where the tagline for S.E.E.R originates, is create, command, and conquer. You create your faction and your roster, you command them on the battlefield, and you conquer your enemies. Just like a particular barbarian I'm fond of.
Yeah, I getcha. Just don't sing.
Fine.
So, on the topic of the future of S.E.E.R, are there any plans to publish a physical copy?
Yeah, actually, that's the end goal for the short term, is to publish a hardcover or paperback. Haven't really, sold 100% one way or the other as far as the idea of form factor goes, but
the specifics aren't hammered out, but the idea is there.
Yeah, there will definitely be a hard copy, not necessarily hardcover, but there will be a hard copy of the book. Possibly including some gameplay assistant stuff like status tokens, range markers, blast templates, that sort of thing.
So, what will the physical copy include? Any extras or bonus tidbits?
Well, rules-wise, generally it'll include the background, so like the storyline, the setting information. It'll of course include the rules for how to play. Faction and roster creation, like how to make your force that you take to the battlefield, and then it'll also include beasts and engines, which aren't part of the game right now. They're have been kicked around and tested and haven't really managed to get to a point where I'm happy with the balance for them, so they're not currently in the book. But being able to include vehicles and large models like monsters are definitely on the agenda, as well as I'd like to, by the time of publication, have campaign rules so you can play a series of games that tie in together thematically using the same force and have your models gain experience and new gear as the campaign goes on.
That could be pretty exciting.
It definitely lends itself well to that sort of game just based on the points buy system, and being able to do that is something that a lot of people that we've playtested with have requested. So it's definitely something we want to get into the book.
Well, let's just see what the future holds, because I definitely can't wait. Next question. How can viewers help in the production of S.E.E.R and contribute to future updates?
Well, and you'll find links to all this in the description below the video, but we currently have Buy Me a Coffee, which is just spend a couple bucks, buy us a cup of coffee. That helps more than you might know. Also Patreon, which of course is a monthly subscription based thing. $1 a month is, worth our thanks and everlasting love. Also at the $5 mark per month, because it comes in different tiers, at the $5 a month mark, you get access to our Discord. You can vote in monthly polls for what the next month's content will be. This month's content actually is a special scenario for S.E.E.R, where it's an ambush of a stationary target. So there's two sides. Normally it's pretty cut and dry and everything's even. This scenario is a little different. It's an ambush and then the defenders. So it's a little bit different deployment, a little bit different victories, objectives. So things like that are going to be the monthly content for the most part. Then at $10 a month, you get access to the monthly content. You get access to the Discord and everything from the lower tiers. And you also get your name in the credits of YouTube videos like this. And then there's a really high-end tier for those that really want to support us, and that's once a month for a limit of 5 people. I will put together, paint, and ship you a model chosen randomly from the pile of shame above my left shoulder.
Not like mine isn't forming as well.
Everybody should have a pile of shame and should always be working to reduce it.
It's kind of hard to reduce when you just keep adding.
Yeah.
It's like it grows exponentially.
I'm guilty of that.
So now what? What's next step?
Well, next is, of course, we're going to continue playing S.E.E.R, getting games in, playtesting. Fortunately, I've been able to meet some folks locally after relocating to the area. And we actually have a playtest game coming up this coming weekend, which I'm really looking forward to. I haven't got to play much in a while, so I'm excited for that. And then as far as videos go, this month you've got this description of what S.E.E.R is, what ClockTower is, and who we are. And then at the end of the month, we're going to do sort of a walkthrough of the roster and faction creation process with models that we picked up from Anvil Industries. They're Daughters of the Burning Rose. So far you can find videos about building those models, a review of them, and then a painting video for those videos that are also on our channel.
So can we expect playtesting videos in the future?
Due to video, like shooting, like that takes a lot of setup and a lot of tech that we just don't have at the moment. We probably will do some like battle report type stuff where it's sort of a walkthrough of each step of the rules and gameplay, and then sort of like how a game turned out. But as far as like shooting a full thing, those videos would be long. A normal game of S.E.E.R between two people that know what they're doing is 30 to 45 minutes. So for a mini game, it's kind of short, but that's still like, even without introduction or outro or any kind of review or film setup, that's still like a 45-minute to an hour-long video before you even talk about anything that went into the game. So those videos are probably a little bit beyond us at this point.
Seems good. Well, Steve, I'm almost ready for my next cup of tea. What do you say we wrap things up from here?
Sounds like a good idea. So if you want to keep up with what we're doing over here at ClockTower and where we're at with the production of S.E.E.R, you can find us on all the usual suspects of social media. We have Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Insta gets daily updates. Twitter gets somewhat frequent updates, and then big announcements get put out on Facebook. Don't forget, you can support us by checking out Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, and if we happen to use any kind of equipment or tools while making our videos, you'll find the Amazon affiliate links for those in the descriptions below the video. Also, I'd like to thank Callie for helping out with the video this week, and I'd also like to throw out thanks to Richard Miller and Chris Barrick for their help with the game over the time we've been working on it. Without those two guys, the game wouldn't be what it is today, and the company wouldn't even have gotten off the ground to start with, so can't thank them enough. And thank you guys so much for watching the video this week. Be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell notification so you can catch our next video where we go into a little more depth about the process of creating a faction and a roster. And until next time, remember, at the ClockTower, it's always game time.